I gave him life. I raised him with everything I had. Never in my darkest nightmares did I imagine my own son would betray me and throw me like garbage, guided by the poisonous whispers of the woman he chose over his own blood. They thought they could cast me aside, discard me like I was nothing. But what they didn't know was that fate had one last card to play. And when I unleashed it, nothing, absolutely nothing, was ever the same again. My own son. Daniel. The boy I raised from a baby, the one I stayed up nights worrying over, who learned to ride a bike in our small backyard under my watchful eyes. He would be the one to look at me as if I were nothing. And then there was his wife, Brianna. She had never pretended to like me. Not really. But I thought maybe, just maybe, Daniel would stop her when her eyes rolled at my presence or when she whispered about me on the phone. I was wrong. My name is Evelyn Grace. I'm 61 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family was everything. I spent decades cooking, cleaning, saving, making sure my husband and Daniel had everything they could possibly want. Every birthday, every holiday, every tiny celebration in our modest San Diego home, I planned it all. Every penny I saved was tucked away with a thought. This is for my family. One day it will matter. But life doesn't always work that way. My husband, Thomas, had a stroke when Daniel was only 14. One moment he was laughing, joking with me about a recipe, the next he was gone. And I was left alone with grief so heavy it made my bones ache. I told myself I still had Daniel. I told myself that as long as he was there, as long as he loved me, I would survive. I had no idea how temporary that love could be. After selling our home, the house full of memories, of laughter and tears, I had nowhere to go. Daniel, in what I thought was kindness, said I could stay with him and Brianna for a while. Brianna didn't say a word. She just gave me a look that could freeze fire and went back to her phone. I tried to be the perfect guest. I stayed in the small back room they offered, cooked meals, cleaned, helped however I could. But Brianna had a way of making me feel invisible, like I had no right to exist in her home. She would ignore me when I said good morning, change the channel when I was watching my favorite shows, and whisper on the phone about me like I wasn't even there. She's like a ghost, I heard her say once. I pretended not to hear it, but it pierced me. Daniel never spoke up. I would look for his eyes, hoping for a spark of defense, and all I found was avoidance. Understood. I'll just get to work. Here's the continuation, fully in first person, in long form, intense, natural storytelling. I packed my 2 small suitcases that night without a single tear. I didn't even glance back at the tiny back room I'd been living in, or at the hallway that had become a battlefield of cold stares and whispered contempt. I walked out of their apartment, my heart heavy, my hands shaking, but my mind strangely clear. I sat on the curb outside for hours, letting the cold night air slap me awake. My phone was dead, my options were gone, and I realized, with a sinking heart, that I had become invisible in the life I had devoted everything to. The next morning, I found a cheap motel on the edge of the city, the kind with peeling paint, carpets that had long forgotten what clean smelled like, and a flickering neon sign that hummed like a broken lullaby. I dragged my suitcases up the narrow stairs, settled on the stiff bed, and stared at the ceiling. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, but it was mine. For the first time in weeks, I had space to think without Brianna's eyes on me, or Daniel's half-hearted excuses hanging in the air. Weeks crawled by. I sent Daniel text after text, small notes meant to remind him I was still here. I hope you're well. Happy birthday, Daniel. Thinking of you today. Nothing came back. I watched the days pile on like gray bricks, one heavier than the last. The loneliness was suffocating, a blanket too heavy to lift. I tried to find work, anything, but the world had no room for a woman my age who hadn't held a job in decades. One evening, desperate for distraction, I opened a box I hadn't looked at in years. Dusty photographs, old letters, and at the very bottom, a small leather-bound diary that had belonged to my mother. I hadn't seen it in decades. Something told me to open it. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, reading her neat handwriting. At first, it was mundane, shopping lists, church notes, complaints about the weather. But then I found an entry that stopped me cold. It was dated years ago, long before I was born. He came to see me today. He says Evelyn must never know. He loves her, even though it can never be. The initials were HJM. I read the entry again, then again. My stomach twisted. My mother's secret lover, someone powerful, someone with wealth and influence, had left a trail for me to find if I ever needed it. Another entry described a trust hidden away from me, to be released if the right person could find the lawyer who knew the arrangements. Henry Walters. The diary instructed me to seek him if life ever turned cruel. I waited 2 days, trembling, before using an old library computer to track him down. Henry Walters. Retired. Palm Springs. The oldest phone number I could find still worked. I wrote a letter, trembling so much I could barely hold the pen. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. "Evelyn?" a weak voice asked. "This is Henry Walters. I always wondered if you'd find me. There's something you need to see." I packed immediately. The bus ride to Palm Springs was long, but I didn't care. When I arrived at his office, a quiet room filled with books and old furniture, he handed me a yellowed envelope, trembling slightly. On the front, in elegant script, for my daughter, Evelyn Grace. Inside was a letter from Howard James Monroe, the founder of Monroe Shipping Lines, a man whose name had appeared in newspapers my whole life. The letter admitted everything: an affair with my mother, love hidden behind secrecy, and a promise. A trust had been left for me, over $2.5 million, ready to be claimed through Mr. Walters. I nearly fainted. I had always been invisible, forgotten, cast aside, and now I held a fortune in my hands. I didn't waste time mourning or planning. I rented a small, elegant condo overlooking the bay. I dressed differently, walked differently, carried myself with a quiet confidence I had never known. I learned everything I could about investing, about business, about buying property. Not to flaunt wealth, not to show off, but so I would never again be powerless. Then I saw it. A 20-unit apartment building in La Mesa, the exact complex Daniel and Brianna lived in. The owner was behind on taxes. The auction was in 3 weeks. I didn't hesitate. I created a company, EG Holdings, moved the money, and placed the winning bid. When the notice went out, Daniel's world crumbled. Tripled rent, lease renewals, panic. His voice on the first voicemail was pleading, desperate, a sound I had not heard in years. "Mom, something weird is happening. Our rent, it's tripled. Can you please call me?" I let it ring. Weeks passed. I watched silently as Daniel's pride and Brianna's arrogance eroded under the weight of their own actions. Maintenance reports trickled in. Broken appliances, leaky faucets, rising complaints. I installed cameras, updated locks, improved security, all under EG Holdings. Every improvement benefited the tenants while crushing Daniel's illusions of control. Brianna eventually knocked on my door, soaked from the rain, trembling, desperate. "Evelyn, please. We can't do this anymore," she whispered. Her eyes, swollen and red, looked at me not with malice, but with fear. "Daniel, he doesn't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do." I handed her tea, sitting silently as she unraveled. And then, softly, I said, "Life gives back what you put into it. You both turned your backs on me. Now you know how that feels." Her tears fell harder. I'm sorry. Did she mean it? I don't know. But I let her leave. And I realized then that revenge isn't about joy. It's about balance. It's about taking power back and never letting yourself be invisible again. From that night on, I became someone my family could never predict. A quiet force behind the scenes. The woman they had thrown out had returned. Not as the broken, begging mother, but as Evelyn Grace, the one holding their future in her hands. And when Daniel finally learns my name is behind EG Holdings, when the truth unfolds, he will finally see what it means to underestimate me. I am invisible no longer. The days after Brianna's visit were quiet, almost eerily so. I spent my mornings drinking black coffee by the window, watching the city wake up below me. I could see the little courtyard of the apartment building, Daniel and Brianna's domain, though they didn't know it yet. I wasn't spying, I was observing, taking note, learning patience. Daniel's calls kept coming, soft, hesitant, full of a shame he didn't even realize he felt. "Mom, I just wanted to talk." I let every voicemail pile up. Each one reminded me of the nights I had spent alone on the motel bed, crying silently into the pillow while he ignored my messages, his wife standing by, feeding his contempt. I hired a property manager to handle the day-to-day, but I monitored everything myself. Every repair, every complaint, every tenant request. I wanted the building to run perfectly, and under my watch, it did. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel and Brianna had made a fortress of control, and I had taken the keys without their knowledge. One morning, a report landed on my desk. Daniel had stormed into the management office again, yelling, demanding. His voice was reportedly red with anger and disbelief. He wanted to see the owner. He wanted names, faces, accountability. I smiled quietly, letting the words sink in. The man who had thrown me out, the boy I had once held in my arms when he was sick, had no idea the very building he thought he owned, the one he had used to push me away, now belonged to me. Meanwhile, Brianna's quiet desperation grew. I began receiving whispers through my property manager. She was crying more often, skipping work, looking haggard. Daniel's rage had become a storm in the apartment, bouncing from her to the walls, to the neighbors, to anything within reach. I didn't gloat, not exactly. I just observed the inevitable consequences of years of cruelty. At night, I studied the city lights from my balcony. My new apartment overlooked everything, yet I felt invisible. Invisible but powerful. I read my mother's diary again, the pages filled with secrets, with love she could never openly give me. Her handwriting was a lifeline. It reminded me of where I came from, of what I deserved. And every time Daniel called, every angry email he sent to my manager, I reminded myself this is not revenge, this is balance. Weeks turned into months. I transformed my own life in the process. I dressed with precision, walked with confidence, and carried myself like a woman who no longer depended on anyone for validation. I learned real estate, investments, the language of money, and influence. Every step I took was deliberate. I wasn't just reclaiming power. I was becoming someone they could never anticipate. Then one afternoon, a maintenance report shocked me. Daniel had cut corners in his own apartment. Water leaks ignored, lights out, trash piling up, corners turned. The apartment was crumbling under their negligence. Brianna's desperation had become palpable. Their anger, their pride, their illusions, they were being crushed under the weight of their own choices. I didn't intervene. I didn't gloat. I just watched, quietly. Every broken tile, every loud argument echoing through the walls, every angry email was a reflection of the moment they had thrown me out with 2 suitcases. Finally, one rainy night, Brianna knocked on my door again. She stood there soaked, shivering, clutching a grocery bag like it was all she had left of herself. "Evelyn, please. I don't know what to do," she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of sleepless nights, constant fear, and growing realization. I handed her a towel, poured chamomile tea, and sat in silence. She looked at me with those haunted eyes, unsure if she even deserved a seat on my couch. And then she said the words that shattered what little patience remained. "I miss you. I want to make things right." I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wanted to punish her further, but because silence spoke louder than words. For decades, I had begged to be heard. For months, I had sent messages into the void. Now it was their turn to feel uncertainty, to wrestle with their choices. When she finally left, dripping and trembling, I sat back and thought about the nature of power. It isn't about wealth. It isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your place in a world that tried to erase you. The woman they thought they had broken had returned, not just as Evelyn Grace, the abandoned mother, but as Evelyn Grace, the woman who held their fate quietly in her hands. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful kind of revenge. The kind that didn't need shouting. The kind that didn't need violence. The kind that unfolded slowly, inexorably, like water wearing away stone. The following weeks were a quiet storm. I watched Daniel and Brianna flail helplessly, their anger bouncing back and forth, ricocheting off the walls of their apartment like trapped echoes. Every maintenance report, every neighbor complaint, every letter sent to my property manager was a reminder that the world had turned. They had once held all the power. Now it was slipping through their fingers like sand, and they had no idea who was holding the hourglass. Daniel's calls were still coming, but quieter now, hesitant, almost ashamed. Mom, can we talk? Please, He never finished. I didn't answer. Each voicemail was a ghost, a reminder of the nights I had lain on that motel bed, heartbroken, invisible, hoping for a shred of love or respect that never came. Brianna's texts began to appear as well, short, desperate notes. Please, help us, we're falling apart. I ignored them all. Patience, I told myself, patience. Let them feel the emptiness they had created. Meanwhile, my life had transformed. I wasn't just Evelyn Grace anymore. I was Evelyn Grace, owner of EG Holdings, a woman in control of a 20-unit building, a small empire I had built quietly, secretly, legally. I dressed for power now, spoke in confidence, and carried myself with the calm certainty of someone who had been through hell and emerged untouchable. One morning, a report arrived that made me almost laugh. Daniel had attempted to investigate the ownership of the building himself. He had called the county offices, filed false inquiries, pretended to be a lawyer, even sent emails from fake accounts asking about the owner. Every attempt failed. He was grasping at shadows, choking on his own arrogance. Meanwhile, Brianna tried to mediate, walking on eggshells around him, trying to protect herself from the storm she had helped unleash. I installed more security cameras, quietly updated locks, and improved every inch of the property under my company's name. Daniel's panic grew as he realized he could not control anything. He began pacing at night, muttering, his voice carrying through the thin walls, frightening Brianna, disturbing neighbors. Glass broke once, a crash that echoed like the sound of his dignity shattering. He was unraveling, and I had nothing to do but watch. And then one rainy evening, Brianna came to me again. I wasn't expecting her, and part of me hoped she wouldn't. But she knocked, soaked, trembling, clutching a bag of groceries like her last lifeline. Evelyn, I don't know how to fix this. Daniel, he's not the man I thought he was. I can't. Her voice cracked. She looked like someone who had aged 10 years in 10 weeks. I handed her a towel, poured 2 cups of tea, and sat in silence. She looked at me, hesitant, lost, ashamed. I miss you, she whispered. I want to make things right. I didn't answer, not because I was cruel, but because for decades I had begged to be heard. Now it was their turn to wrestle with uncertainty, to understand what it meant to have someone wield quiet, unstoppable power. I let her stay for a few minutes. Let her feel the calm of my apartment, the reality that I had transformed from the woman they had discarded into someone untouchable. And then I let her leave. Days passed. Daniel's panic intensified. His arrogance crumbled as the reality set in. He was no longer the master of his little domain. The tenants were happy. The building was running smoother than ever. Every complaint he filed, every angry letter he sent, every desperate email was met with calm professionalism by my management team. Every attempt to dig into EG Holdings ended in a dead end. And yet I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw parties or laugh aloud. This was not revenge in the sense of joy. It was a quiet, unwavering balance being restored. Daniel and Brianna were facing the consequences of their choices, of the cruelty they had inflicted on the woman who had given them everything. One evening, I stood on my balcony, watching the lights flicker in the courtyard below. I saw them arguing again, Daniel shouting, Brianna pleading, their apartment a storm of chaos. I realized something. The woman I had been, the one who would have begged to stay, cried in corners, sent endless messages, was gone. Replaced by someone stronger, quieter, unbreakable. The silence of my new power was louder than any words I could have spoken. And in that silence I found peace. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't helpless. And when the day came that Daniel finally realized the truth, that EG Holdings, Evelyn Grace, was the hand shaping his world, he would understand what it meant to underestimate me. I had been forgotten, discarded, thrown into loneliness and despair. But I had returned. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was claiming my place. The weeks that followed were a slow burn of quiet domination. Daniel and Brianna's apartment became a war zone, though I never set foot inside. Their fights echoed through the walls, shouts bouncing from one corner to another. Every glass that shattered, every slammed door, every tear that fell from Brianna's eyes was a reminder of the chaos they had invited into their lives when they pushed me out. Daniel called less often, and when he did, it was desperate. Mom, please, I need your advice. Something's going wrong, and I can't fix it myself. I let the voicemail sit, let it rot. I wasn't there to fix him, to give him the lifeline he had denied me for months. I had my own life now, my own power. Meanwhile, I oversaw improvements in the building, each one small but impactful. Leaks were fixed, hallways repainted, security cameras installed, lighting improved. Tenants were happier, paying on time, grateful for the quiet stability I provided. And Daniel? He saw none of it. He only felt the pressure, the creeping realization that his control had evaporated. One night, Brianna knocked again. I didn't expect her, and for a moment I considered leaving her standing there in the rain. But she came inside anyway, drenched, pale, exhausted. Evelyn, he's losing it, she whispered. I don't know how to stop him. He's obsessed with finding out who owns this building. He's destroying himself. I handed her a towel and a cup of tea. We sat in silence. She didn't ask for money. She didn't demand forgiveness. She simply needed to be near me. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of the power shift. I didn't say a word. I let her feel it. The woman who had been powerless, invisible, ignored, now holding the fate of their world quietly in her hands. Daniel's unraveling accelerated. Reports from my property manager became daily updates, shouting matches, broken items, missed deadlines, angry notes shoved under office doors. He called pretending to be a lawyer, a tenant, anyone who might reveal the owner. Every attempt failed. He couldn't touch me, couldn't see me, couldn't control me. And then, the quietest, most profound victory came. One morning, my property manager forwarded an email from Daniel, trembling, frantic, unable to hide the collapse in his own words. Mom? I don't know who you are. I can't deal with this anymore. Please, help us. We're falling apart. I didn't respond. I let it sit. I let him wrestle with the emptiness he had created. Let him face the consequences of his own cruelty. And in the silence, I felt something I hadn't in decades, complete control. Not just over money, not just over property, but over the outcome. I was no longer a woman who begged. I was a woman who was listened to, even when my voice remained quiet. Brianna's visits became more frequent, hesitant. She came seeking guidance, solace, anything to navigate the chaos Daniel had created. And every time, I held my silence. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons aren't taught with words. They're shown by presence, by what remains unmoved, untouchable. Finally, one evening, Daniel appeared in the courtyard, pacing, frantic, holding letters, bills, notices. Brianna followed, trying to calm him. And I stood in my apartment, the lights dimmed, watching quietly. He didn't see me. He didn't know I was there, but I could see every frantic gesture, every sign of his defeat. I realized then that revenge wasn't about cruelty. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about restoration. About showing them what happens when someone you try to discard refuses to be discarded. And they had no idea that the quiet, methodical woman they had wronged had built an empire, had claimed control, had become untouchable. I took a deep breath, looking out over the city. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the loneliness, the rejection, the betrayal. Daniel and Brianna would rebuild, or they wouldn't. That was no longer my concern. I had done my part, not through shouting, not through anger, but through patience, strategy, and quiet power. And as the lights of their apartment flickered below, I smiled. They had underestimated me. They had believed they could erase me. And yet here I was, stronger than ever, holding not just my own life, but the very control of theirs, in the quietest, most undeniable way. The storm had passed, but the calm that remained was mine, and it was absolute. I was Evelyn Grace, once abandoned, now unstoppable, and nothing they could do would ever change that.